The chains dragged across the stone floor with a harsh scrape, each clink echoing through the governor's chamber like a cruel song. The air was thick with smoke from the braziers that lit the hall, shadows stretching long across the high walls etched with alien symbols. Rows of colonists knelt with their heads down, silent, afraid to look up. They all knew what happened here. Judgment, punishment, fear. At the top of the dais, she sat upon the governor's throne, tall, straight-backed, wrapped in black leather and alien silk. Her crown was not of gold, but of authority. She didn't need jewels. She had something stronger, fear. The colonists whispered her name like a curse. She had ordered men whipped, women dragged away, whole families starved. Not because she enjoyed cruelty, though many believed she did. It was the only way to keep control under the aliens' eyes. And control was all that kept her alive. The doors groaned open, and the soldiers dragged a new prisoner into the hall. His wrists were bound with iron cuffs, his shirt torn and bloodied. He had fought. The bruises on his cheek and the split lip told that story. But he was still standing, still walking with his back straight. Even in chains, his head was high. The colonists dared to look at him, just for a second. A human soldier. A rebel. Some whispered. A fool. Others muttered. They all knew he would not leave this chamber hole. The soldiers forced him to his knees at the foot of the dais. He hit the ground hard, but refused to bow his head. His eyes, steady, sharp, unyielding, rose to meet hers. She felt it immediately. That fire. For years, she had faced trembling eyes, pleading mouths, broken spirits. They cried, they begged, they obeyed. But this man? He looked at her as if she were nothing but another enemy to stand against. As if the throne she sat on meant nothing. Name, she said, her voice sharp, cutting across the chamber. The soldier's mouth was swollen, but his voice was steady. My name doesn't matter. A murmur rippled through the colonists. Nobody had ever spoken back to her like that. Not here, not before the throne. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, though her eyes stayed cold. Everything here matters, especially names. Speak it, or I'll have it carved into your skin. Silence. He stared at her, unblinking. She felt a strange heat rise in her chest. Irritation, yes, but something else she didn't want to name. Very well, she said, leaning back against her throne. A nameless man, then. Easier to break. Do you know where you stand? The soldier glanced around the chamber. The walls. The guards. The colonists silent and hunched. Then his gaze returned to hers. I stand in front of another chain. Doesn't matter what crown you wear. You're as bound as I am. The word struck her like a hidden blade. For a heartbeat, she lost her breath. He shouldn't have been able to say something like that. Not here, not in front of them. Not with those eyes, steady as fire. The guard shoved him, forcing him lower, but he still didn't bow. Blood dripped from his split lip onto the floor. She rose slowly from her throne. The chamber seemed to hold its breath as she descended the steps, her boots clicking against the stone. She stopped before him, close enough to see the blood, the dirt, the stubborn pride in his expression. He looked up at her, and for the first time in years, she felt uncertain. She lifted her hand, and one of the guards shoved a whip into it. The braided leather coiled in her palm, a symbol of her power, a symbol of what she was supposed to be. Fear made flesh. The colonists lowered their heads even more, not daring to watch. Look at me, she commanded. His eyes never wavered. I've been looking since I walked in. Her hand tightened around the whip. She should strike him. She should carve his defiance into his skin until he screamed. That was what the aliens expected of her. That was what the colonists feared from her. But her hand didn't move. She realized something in that moment, something she could not admit to anyone, not even to herself. His defiance didn't anger her. It unsettled her. It cracked something in her chest, something she thought long dead. Take him to the lower cells, she ordered at last, her voice steady but quieter than before. He is mine now. None touch him without my word. The guards looked surprised, but obeyed. They pulled the soldier to his feet, dragging him toward the iron doors that led below. He never took his eyes off her. Even when the doors slammed shut behind him, she still felt the weight of that gaze. Stronger than chains. Stronger than fear. She turned back to the colonists. They bowed their heads, trembling, waiting for her final word. But she had none. For the first time, she dismissed them in silence. When the chamber emptied, she sat again on her throne. Alone, the whip lay across her lap, but her fingers no longer tightened around it. Instead, she found her mind circling back to those eyes, that voice, that unyielding fire. Fear was her crown. Fear had kept her alive. But now, she wondered, just for a moment, what it would feel like to rule without it. The chamber was colder than stone had any right to be, the kind of chill that seeped into the marrow and reminded every soul who entered that warmth had been outlawed. She sat on her throne, a structure of obsidian angles gifted by her alien patrons, watching as guards dragged him forward again. His wrists were bound in iron, his lips split from their fists, yet his back was straight. That straightness mocked her more than any words could. The court was nearly empty this time. Only her chosen attendants stationed at the walls, their eyes darting nervously between their governor and the defiant human soldier. She had thought the first trial would be enough. Spectacle was her tool. Fear was her crown. But instead of bowing or begging, he had looked her in the eye and asked, no, demanded, why she chose to kneel to monsters rather than stand with her own people. The words had been simple, but they had dug under her skin like glass. Now, she leaned forward, voice dripping with controlled venom. Do you know what happens to men like you, soldier? To those who imagine themselves lions, but are only mice? They are broken. Slowly, he did not look at her throne, her attendants, or even the guards who gripped his arms tighter. His eyes stayed locked on hers, and that fire, gods, that fire, burned in them as though he had not been starved, as though every lash had been a whisper instead of pain. You can break my body, he said evenly, the words echoing in the frozen chamber, but you cannot make me kneel to you. Not you. Not them. The guards tensed, expecting her wrath. She should have risen, struck him, demanded blood. It would have been easy, clean, decisive. That was the rhythm of her rule. But instead, she found her fingers tightening on the obsidian armrest, her chest constricting. Because what he said was not defiance alone, it was disappointment. He looked at her not as a tyrant, not as a goddess of fear, but as something smaller, something lesser, and that stung more than hatred. Take him to the square, she commanded, her voice sharp, almost brittle. Let every colonist see what defiance earns. The guards obeyed, dragging him backward through the iron doors. His eyes never wavered from hers until the last moment, when the doors slammed shut and the chill rushed back in like a tide. Only then did she exhale. When night came, silence was her only company. The alien enforcers never lingered in her halls. They did not need to. She was their instrument, the face of their will, and they trusted fear to do its work. Yet fear, she discovered, was loud. It echoed in her chambers, in her sleep, in the breaths of those who bowed and scraped. The silence now felt heavier than chains. She walked to the mirror in her private chamber, pulling off the gilded crown they had given her. Its edges cut faint lines into her scalp. She stared at her own reflection, the woman who had ruled with cruelty, the woman whose people trembled when she entered. But under the crown, without the mask of ceremony, she saw hollowness. Fear had built her throne, but it was also her cage. She remembered the first time the aliens had offered her this power. The memory came unbidden, a flash of fire and ash. Her people broken, her father's body lying on the steps of the old council hall. The promise had been survival, govern under them, enforce their order, and some fraction of humanity might endure. She had told herself it was necessity. She had told herself she would learn to believe it. But his eyes, the soldier's eyes, had ripped through that lie in an instant. She paced. She tried to push the thought away. She tried to summon the image of herself in the square, commanding the people with a voice that allowed no doubt. She tried to recall the fear in their faces, the silence that followed every order she gave. But tonight, none of those images comforted her. Instead, she saw his stare, unyielding. When the hourglass in her chamber marked the passing of midnight, she found herself moving toward the balcony that overlooked the square. Torches flickered far below, and there he was, chained to the pillar at the center, his silhouette still upright despite exhaustion. The colonists had been made to watch, though most had long since been driven away by the guards. A few lingered at the edges, whispering prayers, their faces shadowed. And she could not look away. She whispered to herself, as though the words could silence the storm inside. It is necessary. They must fear me. If they do not fear me, they will suffer more. But the words rang hollow, because for the first time since she had donned the crown, she wondered if she was the one truly trembling. She gripped the balcony rail until her knuckles whitened. Somewhere deep inside, the crack in her armor widened. She could feel it. She could hear it like glass straining against too much weight. And she knew, though she could never admit it, that he had not broken under her power. No, it was worse. He was breaking her. And tomorrow, when the square filled again for the spectacle she had promised, she did not know if she would be able to wear the mask as easily as before. The prison wing beneath the fortress smelled of damp iron and rot. She had not set foot here in months, not personally. Punishments, interrogations, executions, all were usually left to her guards and overseers. It was beneath the crown to tread these halls. Yet tonight, when the silence of her chamber pressed too hard against her chest and her reflection in the mirror became unbearable, she found her feet leading her here. Two guards snapped to attention at the cell block door. They bowed their heads low, trembling, though she could feel their confusion. She had given no order, announced no reason. "Leave us," she commanded. They hesitated, glancing at each other. Her eyes sharpened, and with a bark of fear, they fled down the corridor. Their boots clattered away until the only sound was the dripping of water on stone. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself, and unlocked the heavy door with her own hand. Inside, the air was colder still, and there he was, shackled, bruised, but impossibly unbowed. Even chained to the wall, he sat upright, as though the weight of iron was lighter than the weight of submission. His eyes opened at the sound of her approach, and for a moment, silence stretched between them like a drawn blade. She told herself she had come to taunt him, to strip away whatever fragments of defiance still burned inside. But as she looked at him, at the dark rings under his eyes, at the cracked lips, at the way his gaze still pierced through the gloom, her rehearsed words dissolved. Instead, her voice emerged softer than she intended. "Do you not tire of this?" A faint smirk touched his face, and it unsettled her more than rage would have. Of chains? Of pain? Or of staring at the woman who traded her soul for power? Her breath caught, though she masked it with a bitter laugh. "Careful. One word too many, and I could have your tongue cut out." He tilted his head, watching her with unnerving calm. "Then cut it. You'd silence me, but you'd still hear my words in your head. You already do, don't you?" She clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms. This was supposed to be mockery, a test of wills. She should have broken him further, spat at him, left him bleeding. Instead, she found herself listening. "You think me a monster," she said finally. "I think you're human," he replied, his voice low, raw. "That's what haunts you. You wear their crown, you speak with their voice, but inside, you're still one of us. And that truth cuts you deeper than any blade could." Her chest tightened. The crown of fear weighed heavier now than it ever had. She wanted to snap at him, to scream that he was wrong, that she had chosen this path willingly. But the words would not come, because in the silence of her chambers she had asked herself those very questions. She stepped closer, until the torchlight painted her face in gold and shadow. "You know nothing of the choices I've made." His gaze never wavered. "Then tell me what makes betrayal into duty. Tell me why you hold their leash instead of standing free. Tell me why you, who should have been our protector, became our jailer." Something inside her cracked again, audible only to her own heart. She thought of her father's blood on the council steps, the smoldering ruins of the city, the alien commander's cold promise, serve or perish. And she had chosen survival. She had told herself it was for her people, that she would spare them greater suffering. But over the years, cruelty had become habit. Fear had become her language. She swallowed hard. "I did what was necessary." "Necessary," he repeated, voice like a knife scraping bone. That's the lie they fed you. Necessary for whom? For them? Or for you? The words pierced her more than she wanted to admit. She had ruled through terror, but now she felt as though terror itself was ruling her. She turned away, retreating a few steps, her cloak trailing across the damp floor. She had come to gloat, to remind him of his powerlessness. Instead, she felt as though he had stripped her bare. For a long time, neither spoke. The torches hissed softly, and the drip of water echoed like a heartbeat. Finally, he spoke again, quieter, more intimate. Fear may hold them for a time, but it will never hold their hearts. You already know this. That's why you're here. She spun toward him, anger and desperation colliding in her voice. And what would you have me do? Stand with you? Spit in their faces? Watch them burn us all to ash? His eyes softened. Not pity, but something gentler, something she had not seen in years. I would have you remember you are not a crown, not a mask, not their weapon. You are human, and that still means something. The silence after those words was unbearable. She felt her throat tighten, her chest heave. She wanted to deny it, to strike him, to reassert the power she wielded. Yet her body betrayed her, trembling in a way no enemy had ever caused. She stepped closer once more, so close now, the iron chains rattled softly between them. His eyes, tired but burning, looked into hers as though they could see the heart she had buried. And for a fleeting moment, she wanted to confess, to admit that the crown she wore was heavier than death, that each act of cruelty carved another scar into her soul. Instead, she whispered, almost pleading, "You do not understand what it costs." He leaned forward as much as the chains allowed, his voice low but unshakable. "Then tell me, let someone understand, because if you bury it all, it will kill you long before they do." Her lips parted, but no words came. Only silence, raw and trembling. She had thought herself a queen of fear, untouchable, her heart long ago entombed. Yet in this dank cell, under the gaze of shackled soldier, she felt naked in a way she had not in years. When she finally tore herself away, slamming the cell door shut, her pulse thundered in her ears. The crown felt heavier, the throne more distant. And as she climbed the stone stairs back to her chamber, she realized the most dangerous truth of all. She had not silenced him. He had silenced her. The fortress was silent, too silent. She knew before they summoned her that something had shifted, that her carefully balanced mask of power had cracked wide enough for the masters to see through. Word traveled like whispers through stone. Her late-night visits, the softened commands, the way she no longer struck fear quite as sharply in the plaza. They had noticed. Of course they had. When the alien guards came, tall and armored in black chitin plates that gleamed under the torchlight, they did not bow to her as they once had. They did not lower their heads or wait for her order. They simply gestured cold and final, and she followed them like a criminal. That single gesture told her everything. Her crown of fear had slipped. They led her to the lower chambers, the place of punishment where even governors rarely tread. The smell hit her first. Iron, blood, sweat, and something acrid that burned the lungs. Chains clinked. Whispers of pain hummed in the shadows. And then she saw him, the soldier, the man who had stared into her eyes and refused to kneel, even when her whole court trembled. The man whose defiance had begun to unravel the wall she had built around herself. He was chained upright, arms stretched cruelly, his body already broken with fresh wounds. Stripes of blood crossed his chest where alien whips had torn his skin open. His head hung, but even through the mess of his hair, she could see his lips twist in that same fire-born defiance. He had not broken. Her heart clenched, though she did not let it show. Not yet. The alien commander stepped forward, his voice a hiss that scraped against her ears. "Governor, your loyalty has been compromised." He gestured toward the soldier. "You visit him in secret. You listen to him. You dare to hesitate before giving orders. Do you think we are blind?" She straightened, fighting to keep her mask intact. "I act for the stability of the colony. Fear must be measured. Even chains must allow breath." The commander's eyes narrowed, unblinking. Chains must only bind. Fear must only break. And he studied her like one inspects a faulty tool. You are forgetting your place. Before she could answer, the whip cracked. It tore across the soldier's skin, ripping a groan from his throat that stabbed into her chest. She had heard countless cries before, cries she herself had commanded, but this sound hollowed her out. She wanted to scream, to stop it, to throw herself between him and the lash. But her feet stayed frozen to the ground. Another strike. Another. His body sagged, yet somehow he lifted his head. Blood dripped down his jaw, and his eyes, burning, unbroken, found hers. Not once did he look at the aliens. Not once did he beg them. His gaze stayed locked on her, as if daring her to admit what she already knew, that she was powerless, that her so-called crown was a chain forged by the same hands that beat him now. Do you see? The commander sneered. Even broken, he defies. And your silence betrays you. You are no ruler. You are our servant. Nothing more. They tore the insignia from her robe then, the golden sash that marked her as governor. They cast it to the ground as though stripping bark from a tree. Without it, she felt suddenly naked, exposed, smaller than she had ever felt in her life. The colonists had once looked at her as a queen of fear. Now, standing there in the flickering torchlight, she saw the truth reflected in every alien sneer. She was nothing but another prisoner. The lashes did not stop. She could hardly breathe as they whipped him again. His knees buckled, his skin shredded, his blood pooled beneath his feet. Her nails dug into her palms until she felt her own blood bead. Every strike carved into her soul like it was her flesh being torn. At last, the commander signaled for silence. The soldier sagged limp, yet his chest still rose and fell. Somehow impossibly he lived. His eyes fluttered open, heavy with pain, and again they found her. In that moment, the truth she had buried erupted inside her. She had never ruled. She had been ruled as surely as every man, woman, and child in the colony. The chains on her were silk and gold, but they were chains all the same. She had traded freedom for a crown of fear, thinking it made her powerful. Now, as she watched the man who had risked everything to remain unbroken, she saw what real power was, the courage to defy. Her lips trembled, but she did not speak. To speak would have been death. Instead, she met his gaze, and though silent, the vow formed in her heart. I will not leave you here. I will not die in these chains. We are not theirs anymore. The aliens dragged her away, their claws gripping her arms with no more reverence than they would show a common servant. Her former chamber was sealed, her privileges revoked. No throne, no guards, no crown. Only four walls, bare and cold. Alone in the darkness, she pressed her hand to her chest where the sash had once lain. The weight was gone. For the first time, she felt the raw sting of emptiness. But inside that emptiness, a spark lived his spark. His fire had passed to her. It burned brighter now than fear ever had. She was not free yet, but she would be. And when she was, the empire that thought her its puppet would learn that chains can cut both ways. The night air smelled of smoke and dust. The colony's ruins stretched before them, crumbling towers and shattered stone like broken teeth against the pale moon. Once, these streets had been filled with laughter, with market stalls and children chasing one another through the alleys. Now, they were only shadows of what had been, bones of a life stolen. They moved through it like ghosts, her leaning heavily on his shoulder, him guiding her step by step. Her fine robes, once the mark of command, were torn and smeared with blood. His back was raw, each lash mark seared deep, but he did not falter. His arm held her steady, his body shielding her from the night patrols. At last, they ducked into the shell of a half-collapsed building. The ceiling was gone, and the stars stared down through the jagged opening like silent witnesses. He lowered her carefully onto a broken slab of stone, then crouched beside her. You need rest, he said, his voice rough but steady. She let out a bitter laugh, though it turned quickly into a cough. Rest? When they'll be hunting us before dawn. They'll hunt, he agreed, tearing strips of cloth from his own shirt. "But we'll live." His hands were gentle as he wrapped the makeshift bandage around her arm, covering the gash left by alien claws. Every touch was steady, deliberate, as though he had done this 1,000 times. She studied his face as he worked, the hard lines etched by pain, the fire that hadn't dimmed despite the punishments, despite the chains. She had been surrounded by men who obeyed without question, who trembled at her word. None of them had looked at her the way he did. Not with fear, not with reverence, but with a kind of piercing clarity, as if he saw straight through the mask she wore. Her chest tightened. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. "You shouldn't have come with me," she whispered. "They'll kill us both now." His eyes lifted to hers, steady, unshaken. "They already tried to kill me 100 times. The difference is, now, I choose why I bleed." The words pierced her more than any blade. She turned her face away, staring at the cracked floor. "All my life, I thought fear was strength. I wore it like a crown, commanded it like a weapon. But it was hollow. Every order I gave, every punishment I carried out, it was never mine. It was theirs. Their law, their chains. I was just the prettiest puppet in the room." Silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of truths long buried. Then his hand, rough and calloused, reached out. Gently, he tilted her chin back toward him. She did not resist. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. Her breath caught. She had answered that question 1,000 times before, to her masters, to her guards, to herself. Power, control, obedience. But here, in the ruins, stripped of her crown and her throne, the truth broke free before she could stop it. "I want to be seen," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "Not as governor, not as the face of their rule, just as me, as a woman, as someone real." The words left her raw, exposed, more naked than when they had torn her robe away. Her eyes stung with tears, though she fought to hold them back. She expected him to mock her, to laugh at the cruelty of her confession. But he didn't. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch so gentle it made her shiver. "I see you," he said simply. No mockery, no scorn, just truth. Her chest tightened until she thought she might break. A sob escaped before she could swallow it, and suddenly she was leaning into him, her forehead pressed against his chest. His arms wrapped around her, strong and steady, holding her as though she wasn't a fallen ruler or a branded traitor, but just a woman who had been too long alone. For the first time in years, warmth spread through her. Not the false warmth of power, not the cold satisfaction of control, but something softer, fiercer, human. His hand traced circles across her back, soothing, grounding. She closed her eyes and let herself breathe, really breathe, without the weight of a throne on her shoulders. The sound of his heartbeat filled her ears, steady and alive, and she clung to it like a lifeline. "I thought ruling with fear would keep me safe," she whispered into his chest. "But fear only made me more their slave than anyone else. And now, sitting here," she pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "Now, for the first time, I don't want to be safe. I want to be free, even if it kills me." His lips curved in the faintest, tired smile. "Then we'll die free, but we'll live first." She laughed softly, a laugh laced with tears. Her hand lifted almost without thought, brushing across his cheek, tracing the scar near his jaw. She had never touched anyone like this before, without demand, without ownership. It was terrifying, it was beautiful. He caught her hand, holding it against his face. His eyes closed, as if her touch carried something he hadn't felt in years either. When he opened them again, they burned with something fiercer than defiance, something that mirrored the fire beginning to bloom inside her. In that ruin, surrounded by ashes and silence, their lips met. Not in command, not in resistance, but in something new, something neither crown nor chain could define. The kiss was soft at first, then desperate, like two souls clinging to the only truth left in a broken world. When they finally pulled apart, she was trembling, but not from fear. She laid her head on his shoulder, her voice barely more than a whisper. "In your arms, I feel human. Not a mask, Not their puppet. Just me. His arm tightened around her. And that's all I ever wanted to fight for. Above them, the stars burned bright, scattered across the sky like 1,000 silent witnesses. The ruins lay in shadow, but within them, two hearts found a flicker of light. They were hunted. They were wounded. But for the first time, they were alive. The chamber was silent, yet heavy with the tension of things unsaid. Shadows trembled against the cold stone walls, cast by the thin blue glow seeping from his skin. He was kneeling, fists pressed into the floor, breath ragged and uneven, as if every inhale threatened to tear him apart. The lines of light spread like cracks across his arms, racing up his throat, pulsing with a rhythm too violent to be natural. She stood over him, crown slightly askew, her mask of command faltering. For the first time, she was not queen, not tormentor, not wielder of chains. She was just a woman staring at a storm about to break loose inside the man she could not contain. He groaned, low and guttural, his body arching as the glow intensified, veins of fire crawling beneath his skin. His eyes snapped open, burning with a light not of this world. And for a moment she saw not him, but the ghost of the alien hands that had carved this curse into him. Experiments in sterile rooms, needles of liquid fire, voices murmuring in languages never meant for human ears. All of it lived inside him, waiting for the moment when flesh could no longer hold it back. And that moment was here. "You need to leave," he rasped, voice distorted by the vibrations shaking through his chest. His body jerked as the light tore deeper into him, cracking his ribs like a vessel under too much pressure. "If you stay, if I lose control, you'll burn with me." But she didn't move. Fear coiled in her belly, yes, but it was not for herself. She could still see the human beneath the glow, the man who had stood unyielding against her humiliation, who had stared into her cruelty with fire that refused to die. That same fire now threatened to consume him. "No," she said, her voice steady though her heart thundered. "I won't leave you. Not to them. Not to this." He slammed a fist into the stone, shattering it as if it were glass. "You don't understand. They made me a weapon. This power isn't mine, it's theirs. It will kill everything." Her throat tightened. Memories clawed at her mind, unbidden. Her own chains, her own years under the shadow of cruelty, made to believe she was nothing but a tool for another's rule. She had clawed her way out, stolen her crown, wrapped herself in fear so that no one could ever use her again. But she knew the truth he was choking on. What they branded into you never truly left. She knelt, reckless, dangerous, pressing her palm to his chest where the light seared through his skin. He jolted, a cry tearing from his lips, but she didn't pull away. Her hand burned, but her eyes never wavered. "Then let me be your anchor. If they made you a weapon, then I'll make you something else. You're not theirs anymore. You're mine." His breath hitched. The light surged wildly, flaring bright enough to bleach the shadows from the walls, then dimmed beneath her touch, as if her voice had pulled him back from the edge. His eyes, still burning, locked onto hers with something between terror and wonder. "Why?" he whispered. "After everything I've been to you, after everything you've done to me." Her jaw trembled, but she held his gaze. "Because you never broke. And because I can't live inside this mask anymore if I let you shatter." For the first time since she had taken the throne of fear, she let him see the crack in her armor, the trembling human beneath. Not queen, not captor, just her. The glow inside him flared again, but this time it pulsed differently, less like an explosion, more like a heartbeat. Her touch spread through him, steadying, reshaping. He felt it, the edges of the alien curse bending, not erased, but no longer only destruction. It was unstable, yes, but it was also alive, fierce, primal. A spark, waiting for direction. And with her hands on him, it found it. He lifted his head, shoulders shaking as he fought to master the storm. The energy coursed through his veins, not burning him now, but humming with possibility. He felt stronger, sharper, his senses stretching beyond the walls, beyond the castle, touching the chains of fear wrapped around every soul outside. And he knew he could break them. She felt it too. The thrum of power in the air, the way the torches flickered though no wind stirred. Her breath caught at the realization. This isn't just a curse, she whispered. It's rebellion. His lips curved into something between a grimace and a smile. Then rebellion is in your hands as much as mine. Their foreheads touched, the glow of his body illuminating her face in soft, dangerous light. Around them, the chamber trembled as the unstable energy bled into the stones. But between them, everything was still. He felt her anchoring him, tethering the storm to something human. She felt him burning, not as her prisoner, but as something she could no longer claim to own. Outside, the world remained shackled by fear, unaware of the crack forming in its crown. But inside, where love met fire, a new spark caught flame, one that would not stay hidden forever. The glow dimmed enough that he could rise, trembling but steady. His hands slid against hers, fingers intertwining, their skin still warm from the heat. He looked at her, no longer with defiance, but with something fiercer, trust. And in that moment, she realized the truth that terrified her most. He had been her prisoner, her weapon, her enemy. But now, standing in the afterglow of fire that should have destroyed him, he was something else entirely. He was the beginning of an ending she could not control. And she wanted it. But as the last of the light receded beneath his skin, a whisper lingered in the corners of the chamber. A voice that was not his, not hers, not human. It echoed in the air like a memory resurfaced. He awakens. The experiment breathes. The spark will spread. They froze, eyes darting to the shadows, but there was nothing. Only silence, heavy with the promise of what had been set in motion. He squeezed her hand, jaw tight. They know. Her blood ran cold. If the ones who had made him still watched, if they had felt his awakening, then their world was already shifting. The chain she had built on fear might not hold. The crown she had claimed might soon crumble. But as she looked at him, glowing faintly still, she knew one thing with clarity sharp as fire. She would not run. She would not cage him again. She would burn with him, if that was what it took. And in the quiet, trembling chamber, fire and love braided into rebellion, waiting for its moment to ignite the world. The first whisper was dismissed as rumor. A frightened guard claimed the governor had stepped down from her throne of cruelty and stood hand in hand with the slave she once tried to break. A miner, bruised and scarred, swore he saw them stride together into the night, their shadows glowing with unearthly fire. A mother told her children that the Queen of Fear had laid her crown aside and taken up a torch. By dawn, the rumor had become a story. By dusk, the story had become a promise. And promises are dangerous things. Word spread like wildfire through the colonists' camps, through the hushed corridors of the labor barracks, across the dusty plains where watchtowers stood like the teeth of some devouring beast. Everywhere the tale reached, backs straightened, eyes lifted, chains felt lighter. The governor was no longer a monster to be feared. She was a traitor to fear itself. And at her side walked the man the aliens could not kill, their weapon turned against them, his fire a living symbol of defiance. At first, the overseers scoffed. They punished, whipped, silenced. But every punishment only sharpened the tale. And when the first tower burned, lit not by alien hands, but by human fire, the Empire realized this was not rumor anymore. This was rebellion. She stood with him at the edge of the flames, the alien structure groaning as it collapsed into molten ruin. The light of it flickered across her face, half shadow, half illumination, her eyes reflecting both the ruler she had been and the woman she was becoming. He was beside her, body humming with unstable energy, his hand gripping hers as if she were the only anchor holding him from dissolving into pure fire. They didn't need to speak. The blaze was their voice. Behind them, the colonists gathered in the hundreds, then the thousands. Shackled men and women. Children who had never seen a sunrise without a tower casting a shadow. Soldiers who had once enforced the will of fear, but now turned their rifles skyward in defiance. For the first time in living memory, The people saw not only the end of chains, but the beginning of something unthinkable. Hope. "Look at them," he whispered, his voice carrying disbelief and awe. "They're not afraid anymore." She squeezed his hand tighter. Fear kept them alive, but it never made them live. Another tower fell, toppled by hands that had once bowed in submission. The aliens reacted swiftly, ships roaring through the skies, weapons scorching the earth. Yet wherever they struck, the colonists rallied back. His fire blazed across the battlefield, searing through armor, bending beams of energy aside. Hers was a different weapon, not fire but presence. The very same crown she once wielded as a prison, she now turned into a banner, rallying the broken, binding them together. They shouted her name, not in terror, but in defiance. Still at night, when the smoke settled and the wounded were carried to makeshift shelters, she felt the weight of it pressing down. The crown had always been heavy, but this new crown, the crown of trust, was heavier still. Fear had been simple, love was not. She lay beside him in the dark, listening to the hum of energy beneath his skin, watching the glow fade and surge as he slept fitfully. She touched his cheek, whispering into the silence, "Don't burn out before we're free." His eyes opened, glowing faintly, catching her in the act. He caught her wrist, pressing her palm harder against his cheek. "Not with you here," he murmured. "You're the only reason I haven't gone up in flames already." In those quiet moments, the war outside felt far away, but never stayed away for long. The aliens unleashed horrors dredged from laboratories, beasts engineered to crush rebellion, drones that bled lightning, mind voices that slithered through the thoughts of men and turned brother against brother. Yet each time, something unexpected happened. Colonists who should have scattered stood their ground. Soldiers who should have betrayed chose instead to resist. A spark caught wherever the governor and the fire-born slave appeared, their defiance contagious. One night, an old miner approached her, dropping to his knees before she could stop him. His voice was raw. "You ruled us with fear. We hated you, but you were ours, and now you fight with us. Tell me true, Governor. Are you one of us?" The words pierced deeper than any blade. She opened her mouth, but no answer came. Before she could speak, the man beside her laid a hand on the miner's shoulder. "She's not one of you," he said, his voice firm, echoing in the silence. The miner's eyes widened, hurt flickering there. But then he added, "She's one of us." And in that moment, the crowd erupted, chains rattling not in despair, but in triumph. The rebellion grew. Towers burned. Ships fell. Colonists rose. Fear cracked. Fire spread. The world tilted on the edge of something it had never dared imagine. Freedom. But in the shadows of the stars, something stirred. The aliens who had made him, who had carved fire into his bones, were not idle. They watched their experiment turn against them, their slave weapon bound by love instead of chains. And in their watching, they planned. The night the largest tower fell, he felt it first. A pulse through his veins, a tug in his chest that was not his own. He staggered, clutching at his ribs, as if something inside was being called awake again. She caught him, alarm slicing through her triumph. "What is it?" he gasped, eyes blazing too bright, voice broken by a truth neither of them wanted to hear. "They're coming." The crowd behind them roared in victory, blind to the shadow that was already descending. Fire crackled in the distance, but above, the stars shifted and a fleet emerged, ships blacker than night, larger than anything their world had seen. Not soldiers, not overseers, the masters. The colonists cheered the blaze of rebellion, not yet seeing the doom hanging in the sky. She gripped his hand, felt the heat searing her skin, and whispered with terror and defiance woven into one. "Then we'll burn the stars, if we have to." And as the fleet descended, blotting out the heavens, the fire within him surged higher than ever before, straining against the limits of flesh and bone, threatening to consume him, or to ignite the universe. The war ended not with a single blow, but with 1,000 small ones. Towers crumbled, ships burned, overseers fled into the blackness between stars. The planet groaned as it shed its chains, the smell of ash and metal thick in every breath. For weeks the rebels lived in a strange silence. No sirens, no whip cracks, no voice of command over the loudspeakers. Only the wind carrying the smoke of a dying empire. The colonists walked like ghosts through the ruins, touching walls they had built under duress. Now theirs again. No one knew what to say. Freedom was heavier than chains. And yet, under the sky once filled with warships, they began to speak to one another, not in whispers, but in voices. Some sang old songs. Some prayed. Some just stood in silence, weeping. She stood apart from them, watching. The woman who had ruled with fear now moved through the people, as if she were a stranger in their midst. She wore no crown, no uniform. Her hair was unbound, her hands stained with the same soot as theirs. They looked at her with 1,000 different eyes. Hatred, gratitude, confusion. No one quite knew what she was now. Governor? Traitor? Liberator? He was beside her, but not as before. His fire had dimmed after the last battle, the unstable energy spent in a storm that had annihilated the alien fleet. He was still strong, but hollowed, like a man who had given a piece of himself to buy a future. The glow under his skin flickered faintly, no longer a weapon, but a scar. They stood at the edge of what had once been the governor's hall, its marble throne shattered into rubble. The sun bled through cracks in the roof, dust motes dancing like ghosts in the light. This was the place where she had first looked down on him in chains. Now the hall was open to the sky, and the chains lay broken across the floor. Without a word, she sank to her knees. The sound of it echoed in the emptiness. Not the kneel of a governor in ceremony, nor the kneel of a soldier in surrender. This was a kneel stripped of all posture, all masks. She looked up at him, and for the first time since she had met him, her eyes were wet. "I don't know how to live without fear," she whispered. "It's all I've ever known. But know what I feel for you. I'm not your ruler. I'm not your mistress. I'm just a woman. And I'm asking," her voice cracked, "please don't leave me alone in this freedom." The hall seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the colonists were gathering, drawn by a sense that something was happening. They peered through the broken arches, their faces caught between curiosity and reverence. He reached down. His hands were calloused, burned, scarred. The same hands that had broken chains, that had torn through alien steel, now closed gently around hers. "I never wanted to take your throne," he said quietly. "I wanted you to climb down from it. And you did. You walked through fire to do it. You're not alone anymore." He pulled her to her feet. She stumbled into him, not as prisoner, not as enemy, but as someone who had finally stopped running. His arms wrapped around her, not as chains, but as shelter. The colonists saw it, their feared governor clinging to the man she once owned, the man who had turned his fire into a weapon for them. And then something shifted in the crowd. One by one, they lowered their heads, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. Some knelt, some raised their fists. None spoke. They didn't need to. In the ruins of the Hall of Fear, a new story was being written in their silence. Above them, the sky cleared. For the first time in generations, no alien ships patrolled it. Stars shone bright and unblinking, and in their cold fire, the people saw something vast, a future bigger than their planet, bigger than their chains. Word of the lovers spread faster than the war ever had. Traders carried it to other colonies. Refugees told it in hushed tones on distant stations. Soldiers in hidden garrisons repeated it before raids. The story of the woman who ruled with fear but chose love, and the man who was made of fire but chose not to burn her. It became more than a tale. It became a banner. Not chains, not crowns, but hearts. The story that had begun in a throne room of cruelty now moved through the stars like a comet's tail, a legend too bright to smother. At night, when the fires were out and the people slept, she and he walked the ruins together. They didn't speak of ruling or fighting anymore. They spoke of planting, of building, of how to teach children who had never known a day without hunger or terror. Sometimes he caught her staring at her hands, as if she still felt the weight of the crown. Sometimes she caught him rubbing at his arms, as if afraid the glow would flare again. One evening she asked him softly, "Do you think they'll ever forgive me?" He looked out at the horizon, where the first green shoots were pushing up through the scorched earth. Forgiveness isn't something you wait for, he said. It's something you live into. Day by day. She closed her eyes, leaning into his shoulder. And you? Will you stay? His answer was simple. If you want me. She turned to him, her face open, unarmored. I do. He kissed her then, not the desperate kiss of war, not the forbidden kiss of captivity, but the slow, steady kiss of two people who had survived the end of something and were daring to begin again. Around them, the Hall of Fear stood in ruins. Above them, the stars watched in silence. And within them, something stronger than crowns or chains began to take root. Years later, the story would be told differently. Children would play at being the governor and the fire-born rebel, turning their struggle into a myth. Scholars would debate whether she had truly knelt, whether he had truly glowed with fire. But those who had been there would remember. They would remember the moment fear turned to fire, and fire turned to love, and love turned to legend. And on quiet nights, far from the ashes of their old world, she would still wake to feel his arm around her, warm and steady, and know that whatever else history forgot, one truth would remain. They had not ruled. They had not burned. They had chosen each other. And in that choice, they had freed a world.